Hello, and thanks for clicking on this video. I titled this talk, Let's Ban KPIs. And what I really mean is let's ban the way that we use KPIs inside organisations. Most organisations are trying to achieve a culture of continuous improvement. That is, let's continually learn and improve about how we do things. We say we want to be high performance organisations. And with the same thing, we have to learn then from our performance measures how we're improving and how we're reaching our goals. But most organisations use KPIs in a way that destroys those cultures. It destroys learning. So there are four key things I'd like to talk about around KPIs that for me just are counterintuitive. They sort of seem like the right approach, but in reality, it doesn't move us towards our goals. So firstly though, a key KPI is a key performance indicator, right? Just the language. And what it is actually a performance measure that's got a target attached to it. So we have the measure and then we put a target on it. Now, most times when a lot of managers come up with their KPIs, they're just a target. 80% of that, 25 of those, 7 of those per hour. And what we end up doing with that is we actually haven't defined the measure. What we've done is we've just come up with a target and an idea for a measure. But let's talk about how we use KPIs first up. So the first issue I have that I want to talk about is that when we use KPIs in that way, we put them in place, most of the time we use gut feel to select those measures. Whereas what we should be doing is saying, this is what we want to achieve. This is the result we're aiming for. Now, let's design some measures that will give us feedback about if we're progressing towards that result or not. But we tend to use brainstorming and other idea collection methods to come up with a list of measures. Then we typically cross out the ones that we can't get data for, and what we do is we end up with a short list of measures and we put targets on them. That's not a way to actually come up with your performance measures. Then, actually, aside to that, then I worked recently with an organisation I was engaged to review their balanced scorecard, and they were a mid-sized financial services group. This was their exec balance scorecard. It was a beautiful spreadsheet, quadrants laid out well, objectives laid behind those, targets, and then there was a set of measures. Some of them that were developed, some of them were just ideas to measure at this stage. Now, the key thing there though was that the executive group, who this balance scorecard was for, there were 14 targets, KPIs. They were measures that had targets. 14. And they had to be weighted so that they could be assessed on an overall of 100%. So each one of those 14 KPIs had a weighting of either 5 or 10%. And that leads me on to the second issue. The second issue is that we're using KPIs and they don't actually signal what it is we're trying to achieve. We tend to get measures, put targets on them, the 14, and then we lay them out and say, here they are. But in talking with the people of that organisation, there were two key priorities for the business. And they weren't really reflected in those 14 KPIs. And I often see this, that what we do is we set targets based on things that we can achieve. And the more targets that we have, the less likely we are to actually achieve them. We don't use KPIs to signal what areas are important, and we set too many of them. In the book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution, they did the research across the Western world, and they figured out that if you have 12 goals, the likelihood of achieving any of those goals with excellence is 0. You need to have priority, you need to have focus, and it's say between 2 and 4 goals that you're working on in terms of improvement. Third issue then is around we use KPIs as targets to manage people and performance. There's a couple of things that happens with that. One is we set these targets, people are assessed on them, and if we're going to set them collaboratively, presumably, like those execs did that I mentioned before, you tend to set targets you know you can achieve. Therefore, there's no real stretch. We might actually want to put some effort into these things, but typically it'll just be the way it is. So we don't often set ourselves stretch goals. If we do have stretch goals set for us, the key thing about setting stretch goals is that I have to believe in that goal. If I don't believe in it, then I'm just going to give you the number that you've asked me for. And oftentimes what will happen in that case is that people will manipulate the measure, or they'll manipulate the system to achieve the target output in terms of the number that you're looking for. And all that does is actually pollute the system of all the information and the data that we're looking at. And it doesn't help us achieve our goals. The fourth issue with KPIs I'd like to talk about is that we mix up business as usual with target areas for performance. I worked with a government department in South Australia recently, and I made this throwaway line through conversations with them that a lot of organisations have about 150 KPIs. These guys went away and counted their number of KPIs. They had a report that came out each month. 194 key performance indicators were in their report. What's the problem with that? There's just too much going on. And there's a lot of work that's a key KPI, which is just business as usual. It's the standard of performance that we hit and achieve every single day. If we call those KPIs, then what are the things that we're really trying to change? Where do we want to see a shift in performance? Where do we want to see a step change? And I believe that's what KPIs are really about. They should be placing focus on the areas that we really want to improve. So I'd like to suggest that we ban the way that we're currently using KPIs. It doesn't help. It doesn't help us achieve a continuous improvement culture. It doesn't help us engage people in performance improvement. It typically leads to disengagement or manipulating the system. And I reckon we should move to KPMs. Let's focus on what the key performance measures are that are going to let us know that we're getting the feedback that we're on what we're trying to achieve, the results we're trying to achieve. And from that, we will become a learning organisation. If we can demonstrate to people that we're using measures that will then allow us to learn, which means there can be some failure, as long as we learn from it and we move forward with that. That is a continuous improvement culture, and that is a high performance organisation. Thanks for watching.